Howdy, and welcome to DuckstheGathering, your one-stop shop for mediocre commander deck construction and philosophy. Dragons, birds, and sometimes pirates, they all can fly. For a long time, flying creatures in Magic have interested me. I've always felt that flying is a theme to be particularly powerful in casual and mid-power circles, because I find it is often an afterthought in deck construction. I'll often mention that I'd like to play a flying deck to a table, and be met with people questioning whether or not their decks contain anything that can even block a flying creature. Most often, if they can, it's because they happen to have a typal deck focusing on one of the flying types, such as dragons, fairies, or birds. Additionally, I have long been interested in building what I'd consider a Goodstuffs deck, a deck composed of decent creatures but lacking a core specific strategy, besides interacting with opponents and swinging for damage. The combination of these two interests manifested in the creation of this deck. While almost every creature flies in this deck, it is mostly an afterthought regarding synergy. Rather, I focus on having a high card quality while leveraging my ability to more easily swing for damage. The effect that this deck has had on my playgroup has come full circle, and even affected the construction of my other decks, and for that reason, it will be the first deck I discuss. So this deck started as the Flying Starter Precon, piloted by Spiria Supreme Judge. However, this was changed because I didn't really like the fact that I had to rely on my opponents doing something to draw me my cards. So I quickly switched it over to Linvala, Shield the Sea Gate. Now the top text, I never activated it. It involves tapping down creatures, I didn't care. However, she can be sacrificed, and I get to choose Hexproof Indestructible, and creatures I control would gain that ability until end of turn. I liked this. It was nice to be able to protect all the creatures in my deck, but it led to controlling games that weren't very interactable. This wasn't fun for me, and it wasn't fun for my opponents too. It felt more like rock, paper, scissors. I quickly moved on to Derevi, who had similar problems, but at least now I could play green cards, which was pretty cool. But I quickly grew tired of needing to explain to people that my Derevi wasn't Derevi who piloted a stacks deck, it was Derevi who played a flying deck. So eventually I landed on Kyodai and O-Kagachi, who are the two commanders I currently switch out as I feel like it. So here they are. We have Kyodai, Solar Kamigawa, 3 colorless and a white, legendary creature, flash, flying, 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, another target permanent gains indestructible for as long as I control Kyodai. Additionally, I can pay 1 of each color to give Kyodai +5/+5 until end of turn. I like being able to protect the most valuable creature on the board at instant speed. I don't really care about always having my commander out, but the benefit is nice. O-Kagachi, on the other hand, for 1 and 1 of each color, flying trample, and whenever O-Kagachi Vengeful Kami deals combat damage to a player, if that player attacked you during their last turn, exile target non-land permanent that player's controls. O-Kagachi plays a more aggro style. They are a flying trampler 6/6, so they can beat face a lot easier. And additionally, they want to be cast because they want to be able to exile things. They also serve as a little bit of deterrence. People don't want to attack me because then I'll come back with O-Kagachi and exile one of their things. I believe in building decks and going through decks from the bottom up. For that reason, we'll be starting with my mana base of 39 lands and starting with the fetches. So firstly, of the fetches that I do run, I have Bloodstained Mire, Flooded Strand, and Polluted Delta. They are not chosen specifically because they are the best for this deck, they are chosen because they are the ones I own. Same thing for the Triomes, which the fetches often grab, they are the 3 that I happen to own. Beyond the standard array of fetch lands and Triomes, I also have some more unique fetches. Crozen Verge is amazing because with 1 activation of Crozen Verge, I can get all 5 of my colors by grabbing a combination of tri-lands. Additionally, Tranquil Landscape cycles, entering into basic forest, plains, or island, and is often just what I need, and has the added benefit of coming in untapped. Similar case with Urza's Cave, it comes in untapped, tapping for mana, but for 3 and tapping it, I can sacrifice it and get any land card in my deck. Often, I find myself grabbing a Command Tower or Exotic Orchard to get whatever colors I'm missing. As for more mana fixing, I run 3 typed dual lands that I can also get with my instants and sorceries that fetch out basic land types, or my fetch lands, and then the aforementioned Exotic Orchard and Command Tower. Finally, some more notable lands, we have Inkmoth Nexus and Moorland Haunt. Inkmoth Nexus, while tapping for colorless, can be activated for 1 colorless and became a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature with flying and infect. I've never won with infect before, but sometimes the extra body is all I need to squeeze out a victory. A similar case with Moorland Haunt, it taps for colorless, and I can pay a white and a blue, tap it, and exile a creature card from my graveyard, making a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying. Sometimes it's a chump blocker, sometimes it's the last little bit of damage, other times it's the mana sink and something to do when I have nothing else. The next link in the chain of my deck would be Ramp. Now, the most notable Ramp cards in my deck are those that also provide a flying body. Watcher of the Spheres and Warden of Evo's Isle both provide me mana reduction effects. Merely of Pitsy, Birds of Paradise, and Ornithopter of Paradise are all mana dorks, and Cartographer's Hawk and RMS Titanic both give me mana on a hit. Additionally, I really enjoy announcing to the table that I've just casted the Titanic. Now, 2 of the best ramp spells in my entire deck are Slimefoot Survey and Chromatic Lantern. Slimefoot Survey is 4 and green for a domain ability. Search your library for up to 2 land cards that each have a basic land type. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Then I may look at the top X cards of my library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands I control. Put up to 1 of them on top of my library, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, after I get 2 lands with Slimefoot Survey, I should almost always have all 5 land types, so it's great card advantage and it's great ramp. Similar effect, Chromatic Lanterns lets me tap it for 1 mana, and additionally lets all of my lands tap for a mana of any color. If I see either of these in my opening hand, and I have the correct number of mana sources in my opening hand, I feel very safe, because I know I'll have all of my colors. Next up is my favorite ramp spell, and that would be Sunbird Standard for 3 mana, tapping for 1 mana of any color. However, the reason it's my favorite is because I can craft with 1 or more. This means I pay 5, I exile this artifact, exile 1 or more other permanents I control and or cards from my graveyard, and then return this card transformed under its owner's control as a sorcery. Now, it comes back as Sunbird's Effigy, and that is a flying, vigilance, haste body, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of colors among the exiled cards used to craft it. Additionally, for each color among the exiled cards used to craft Sunbird's Effigy, I add 1 mana of that color. So, regardless of which commander I'm using, this has a very powerful effect. If I'm using Kyodai, I can craft with Kyodai and get it back into my command zone. This is useful when the thing Kyodai was protecting has already been removed, say in case of an exile effect. Additionally, this is good when I'm running O-Kagachi, because crafting with O-Kagachi gives me all 5 colors. This will come back in and immediately be able to tap for 5. Often, I'm able to exile O-Kagachi, return it to the command zone, then tap Sunbird's Effigy and recast O-Kagachi right away. Now that we've played our lands and casted all of our ramp spells, it's important that we can refill our hands. For this, I can use Baleful Strix and Steamcore Scholar to draw cards when they enter the battlefield, and Angel of Demity can get me an important card back from the graveyard. All 3 of these abilities can be reused when I blink them with Disorder in the Court. Additionally, Heraldast, Erupting Nullkite, and Hydroid Krasis both draw me cards on cast. Cyrus and Malcolm can draw me a card when they deal damage to a player, and Likeness Looter can loot. Cemetery Illuminator does double duty, both exiling problematic cards from other people's graveyards and allowing me to cast spells from the top of my library if they share a card type with an exiled card. Some additional things to note about these cards. Baleful Strix has Death Touch, which can allow it to block things that are much bigger than it. Additionally, Xyrus not only lets you draw cards, but forces your opponents to draw cards as well, and will give you plenty of 1/1 green snake blockers whenever your opponent draws a card. Additionally, Heragast gives all my creatures a merge, which means I may cast that spell by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. Beyond the most consistent ways to draw cards, we also have card draw options that involve our opponents. They are among my favorite because they create interactive and, in my opinion, fun games. Farina says, whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another one of my opponents, the attacking player draws a card, and I always get 2 +1/+1 counters. Aurelia similarly draws me a card whenever a player attacks with 3 or more creatures, and if a player attacks with 5 or more creatures, it deals 3 damage to each opponent and I gain 3 life. Nif Mizzet will draw me a card whenever any player casts an instant or sorcery spell, and can also deal 1 damage at a time to any targets I see fit. Asperia draws me a card whenever a creature attacks me, or a planeswalker I control. In Shadrits, at combat, I can choose what to do, but an opponent will always get either a 2/1 flyer, a card draw, or to get a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control. Interaction and the ability to control the game is nearly as important as winning. If you can't get a problematic permanent off the battlefield, winning can sometimes feel impossible. For that reason, I run a large removal and control suite. Aerial Extortionist is great. It can handle any permanent repeatedly, and even draws cards when they recast it or when players cast from other places than their hand. These are such places as the Command Zone, or the Graveyard, or even Exile, which includes Cascade and Impulse Draw effects, which have become increasingly common. Volatile Stormdrake is great at handling creatures, while Trigon Predator handles enchantments and artifacts. Malanthrope is great at handling graveyards, and can even get massive while doing so. On the other hand, Dreamshackle Geist might seem weak, but often other players may only have 1 flying blocker, and Dreamshackle Geist can handle that. It can also be defensive and keep a threat tapped down. On the other hand, I also deeply value protection. Saphara Sky's Blade comes in as a flying, life-linking 7/7 that grants all my other creatures with flying indestructible. Additionally, I may pay 1 white mana and tap 4 untapped creatures I control with flying, rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Lunvala fulfills a similar role, being able to sacrifice herself in order to give my board either hexproof or indestructible for 1 turn. Magmatwake and Deathbringer Regent are the 2 board wipes that this deck runs. Magmatwake only deals damage to things without flying, and thus is one-sided, and Deathbringer Regent might kill everything, but it leaves you with a 5/6 on the board afterwards. Hope Ender Coatl is a 2/3, flash flying 2/2, and when I cast the spell, I counter target spell an opponent controls unless they pay 1. Sometimes it's getting rid of a threat, sometimes I want to get rid of a removal spell, and sometimes I really just need the 2/2 blocker. And lastly, I have Jubilant Skybonder for 3 mana. They are a flying 2/2, and say, creatures I control with flying have spells your opponents cast that target this creature cost 2 more to cast. These 6 cards made sure that whatever my opponents want to do, they're going to have a little trouble doing it. Something I have a fondness for is role compression. I appreciate it if a card can do multiple things, depending on the circumstance I find myself in. Wreck and Rebuild provides both ramp and removal options, either destroying an artifact or enchantment, or milling 5 cards and getting a land from my graveyard to the battlefield. Derevi can ramp me by untapping lands, provide a pseudo-vigilance effect by untapping my attackers, and also tap down any of the flying blockers that might get in my way. Iganho, Seed of the Empire, taps for mana, as it is a land, but can also be channeled to deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, and that ability costs 1 less for each legendary creature I control, which this deck has quite a few. Naya Charm does a lot. It can tap down blockers, it can remove a creature, I can give myself or an opponent something back as well. This means I can play it very political. Lastly, there's disorder in the court. For X, white, and a blue, and it's an instant, I can exile X target creatures, then investigate X times, returning the exiled cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is important because of the investigation adds card advantage. I can remove troublesome blockers with it. I can blink an attack by blinking the attackers, and additionally I can blink any of the cards I have with ETB effects. Now here's a card I have in the deck because I think it's funny. This is Gargos. 3 colorless, green, green, green for an 8/7 with Vigilance. Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast, and whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, Gargos Vicious Washer fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. I have this in the deck as the one non-flyer because I used to have a Gargos deck that I took apart because I felt it was too powerful and not fun to play against. Thus, its inclusion is a nod to its legacy for me. Additionally, it does synergize well with the one other Hydra in my deck, Hydroid Krasis. Since its X cost would be reduced by 4 mana, I'm able to draw even more cards and gain even more life with it. Now we're going to look at how I make my board even scarier and stronger. Trina, Liberator of Malakir, is 1 colorless, black, black for a flying, first strike, 2/3. Whenever they deal combat damage to a player, I put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature I control, including herself. Additionally, since she has first strike, all the other creatures get the +1/+1 counter buff before they deal their damage. Empyrean Eagle gives all my other creatures with flying +1/+1, and Thunderclap Wyvern does just the same, except it also has Flash. Thraben Watcher is one of my favorite cards in this deck. For 2 colorless, white, white, it's a flying Vigilance 2/2, and grants my other non-token creatures +1/+1 and Vigilance. I think Vigilance is an incredibly powerful ability, because it lets me swing out, often evasively, and then hold all of my blockers back so that people can't attack me in retaliation. Zerium is in this deck because I think it makes a lot of blockers, and I also think it's kind of a cool card. For 3 colorless, a white, it's a flying 3/4 Griffin, and says whenever a Griffin I control deals combat damage to a player, I create a 2/2 white Griffin creature token with flying. And now, I've created a little graph of this so we can see just how powerful this might be. We start with 1 Griffin, then we get 2, and then we get 4. And after that we would have 8, 16, 32, so on. I think this could be a powerful effect. I'm still trying it out. I like the idea of being able to attack with both Griffins and then having that many blockers left over to block with. Additionally, we have Martial Anthem. Martial's Anthem costs 2 mana and 2 white. Additionally, has a multi-quicker for 1 and a white, so I may pay that additional 1 and a white any number of times I cast the spell, and it gives all my creatures +1. Additionally, when it enters the battlefield, I return up to X target creatures from my graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of times Martial's Anthem was kicked. I think it's really good because late in the game, I can play it and not only buff my board state, but if I'm behind, bring back a bunch of creatures that can become relevant again. And here it is. Beyond pumping the board, this is the single card in my deck that actually cares about flying creatures. It serves to provide a life buffer and get me back into the games that have run a little long and run my life total a little down. This is Archon of Redemption. 3 colorless and 2 white, creature Archon, flying, and it's a 3/4. Whenever Archon of Redemption or another creature with flying enters the battlefield under my control, it may gain life equal to that creature's power. It's not the most amazing card, but it can definitely keep me relevant in some of the games that have gone a little long. So now that I've shown you the core of the deck, I'd like to take a moment to show off some of the notable synergies that I have in the deck. First off, with Sephara and Kyodai making it indestructible, everything with flying on my board is indestructible, including Kyodai. They grant each other indestructible, and it's very hard to interact with. Additionally, Linvala and Riani do something kinda similar. Linvala can sacrifice herself to give my board hexproof if there's, like, say, a Path to Exile, or indestructible for a board wipe, and then Riani will see Linvala die, and return Lunvala to my hand at the next end step so that I may recast her and use her ability again. Lastly, we have Derevi, and yes, I'm running Nadu. Now, Derevi is going to target a creature or any permanent, and that includes Nadu. So every time an ETB happens on my side, Nadu will get a trigger, because I can target one of my own creatures. Every time I deal combat damage, Nadu will get a trigger. This means I can very quickly turn combat damage and ETBs into both card draw and ramp. This will get even crazier with Zerium, because now I'm going 2 card advantage / ramp, 4 card advantage / ramp, 8 card advantage / ramp. This is something I'm very excited to pull off if I ever can. Now that we're nearing the end, I'll take a moment to look at some honorable mentions. First, we have Protection Racket, 2 and a black for an enchantment. At the end of my upkeep, I repeat the following process for each opponent in turn order. I reveal the top card of my library. That player may pay life equal to that card's mana value, and if they do, I exile the card. Otherwise, I get it in my hand. So, I do have some expensive things, so there's lots of life that would need to be paid, and additionally, this is seeing 3 cards a turn cycle, which is really good, in my opinion. Then we have Tegwill's Scouring for black for a sorcery, but I may cast it as if it had flash by tapping 3 untapped creatures I control with flying. This will destroy all creatures, and then give me 3 1/1 fairy road creature tokens with flying. So, blows up the board, and leaves me with a little something left over. And finally, we have Windshaper Planetaire for 4 and a white, flash flying 4/4. When it enters the battlefield during the declare attacker step, for each attacking creature, I may reselect which player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So this means if someone has swung all out at me, I can send that entire attack somewhere else. Additionally, if someone's trying to swing at one player, I can kind of make a deal and save them. I think it's a very possibly fun political card to be playing. On the other hand, I think it's important to understand the cards I've decided not to include. Bower Passage and Archetype of Imagination are 2 cards with very similar effects. Bower Passage says creatures with flying can't block creatures I control. This means that the only things that could block many of our creatures must have reach, which is even rarer than flying. Additionally, Archetype of Imagination removes flying from my opponent's creatures and gives all of my things flying. So again, only reach would be blocking. I found that this was kind of toxic, and also they don't commit much to board state. I found that I much preferred like Naya Charm for tapping down if I was worried about blockers. Additionally, I have Gravitational Shift and Aeneas. Gravitational Shift buffs my board, weakens the board of other people. I didn't like how much of a target this made me. I also felt like it was a 5 mana do nothing, worst case scenario. And I also do want my opponents to be hitting each other, and if their stuff is weaker, they can't hit each other as effectively. As for Aeneas, this is more of a deck philosophy thing. It's not what I want to be doing. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures with flying, each player gains control of a non-land permanent of your choice, controlled by the player to the right. I don't want to be stealing things that often. I just don't want to take my deck in that direction, so I simply didn't include it. Here are some stats taken from Architect. You can also find the link to the deck in the description below if you'd like to look it over. I'd love to listen to your thoughts, suggestions, and critiques in the comments down below. On that note, I have 2 other decks I'd like to share. A Farrakha deck juggling sacrifice, enchantments, and token signatures, and a budget Housen and Street Urchin deck aiming to maximize the Street Urchin ability and swing in with an army of 4/4 tokens. Let me know what you'd like to see next. Beyond that, this is my first time attempting content creation, so any advice and critiques are appreciated. Drop a like and maybe subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And with that said, peace out.